Good afternoon. Today is Monday. It is January 19th. It's about 12:30 in the afternoon, about lunchtime-ish. And today, awful work. It's MLK Day. So, happy MLK Day, if that's what you actually say in this kind of instance. But, hey, day off of work is day off of work. I have had a while since I got in front of the camera here. I was sick over the holidays a little bit. And then a couple weeks ago, a tooth in the back of my mouth got chipped, which then my tongue rubbed against, and it swole. And then because it swole, I started to bite it. I was out of commission for a while. And I'm actually behind, besides that reason, doing these things. I have this book for you here today. I even got a backlog of 4 others that I had finished that I want to get around to as well, hopefully as soon as possible, and clear my desk. I'm always fighting from behind for some reason. But then again, today is another edition of a Joe's Book Review. This is a section of the channel where I discuss books that I have currently read, and I bring them to you. And why would I do this? Because I love stories. And in this micro section of the interwebs, I'm bringing along things that, kind of caught my eye. Things that, hey, I thought I should read this at this time on this day. Some might be contemporary works. Some may be old, possibly even classics. Some, like this one, have been praised and lauded about for a great many years, and I just hadn't gotten around to it yet. Well, now, for this one at least, I have gotten around to it. So let me take you along this little journey of mine, and you can tell me if it rings any bells with yourself, or if my opinions are just wrong and completely off base. And it's almost required to say it on any video people do here. I have to make mention to you, please put a subscription in your channels, of my channel. You can know when and where I drop other content, or when I finally finish the other 4 I've already finished reading, and get them out there. So, there you go. Like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully one of these days I'll make the magical subscriber number of 500. So that's my current goal. I'd love to hit it this year. So, moving on. Now, let me just put a small background before I start this of myself and comics, just to lay the groundwork. It's probably been about 25 or 30 years since I was an avid reader of comic books. At one time, in my youth, I spent every dollar I can get just amassing a collection. And I also followed some of the trends that came out about then, too. And for me, I was more of the X-Men side of the world. With a penchant for the movie licensing that came through Dark Horse Comics. I mean, Dark Horse would make comics about aliens, Predator, Terminator, which were fantastic. But for me, I had a real penchant for 2 specific characters when they came out. Things I just couldn't get enough of. One was a Dark Horse comic character called X. Street level, beat 'em up kind of guys, deal with the mafia, that kind of a comic. And the other one was the original Death's Head. I loved the original's Death's Head. And that's before the 90s killed it with their Death's Head 2. Now for DC Comics, I was typically following Batman and Green Lantern were my favorites. And one of the greatest things that DC had ever done was when Mike Grell took the head for Green Arrow. I mean, basically stripping down the super part of the hero, jettisoning the trick arrows and things like that, and making the character extremely grounded in the pseudo-reality of the world. And once in a blue, Mike Grell would have other hero guests join in. But it wasn't for anything fantastical. Green Lantern would make an appearance in a storyline, but he's not using his ring and not fighting anything. He was just an old friend. Back when DC did their Green Arrow, Lantern series. No reason to put them together except they had green in the name. But he would make an appearance and just help him out with a mental thing. They even had a series arc with the Warlord, because the 2 characters looked identical. And he often did little adventures with the Question. But otherwise, Mike Grell's run of Green Arrow was very visceral, and it was street-level justice. So why does that matter? Who cares why you liked what you liked? Well, for starters, I never really knew much about the pantheon of DC heroes. I was familiar with them on a very surface level. I mean, I knew of the main Justice League characters, but not very far beyond the main six. A Batman, a Superman, the Flash, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Aquaman. I didn't really know much about the Martian Manhunter, nor did I know much about Cyborg. Basically, whoever was in the Super Friends cartoons back in the 70s, that's who I had a little knowledge of, and probably from that cartoon. So characters like Shazam and Blue Beetle or Booster Gold and the like, I wasn't aware of them at all. I was always of the opinion that Marvel had some of the better characters. However, DC Comics always had some of the better storytelling. I don't know if that's still a thing like today, but it was back then. Or at least for me it was. Also, back in my day, there were some graphic novels that came out which were just must-reads for anyone who's into the hobby. You know, Alan Moore usually comes into mind. It's right in the forefront with his tales of the Watchmen and V for Vendetta. You also had Mouse, The Dark Knight Returns, Arkham Asylum, Miracle Man, which I actually haven't gotten around to yet, and possibly God Loves, Man Kills from the X-Men. So like I said, the best stories seem to be written on the DC side. But as I was coming out of the age of comic collecting, this one right here started taking front and center to grab my attention for the stage. Kingdom Come, a 1996 offering that was under the DC's Elseworlds print. Now, what was Elseworlds, if you're not familiar? I'm sorry, not Elseworlds, Elseworlds, the Elseworlds print. Their tagline at the time when they started it was, "Heroes are taken from their usual settings and put into strange times and places. Some that have existed or might have existed, and others that can't, couldn't, or shouldn't exist. The result, stories that make characters who are as familiar as yesterday seem as fresh as tomorrow." I mean, just perfect. We got stories with kind of like that Marvel what-if feel to it. You know, what if the Green Lantern ring went to Bruce Wayne instead of Hal Jordan, where now Batman has Green Lantern powers? Or if Superman crash-landed in Gotham instead of near Smallville, or even if Superman landed in Russia instead of in Smallville. They put some heroes back in Victorian times, or even as Vikings or barbarians. Just really push the envelope on the other dimension spin by making it simultaneously non-canon for the universe. Well, this one here did just such a thing. So with all that being said, now let me jump into the show. I'm sorry for the long preamble, it's just my style. Lets you know where my mind is, so you could know where I'm coming from. I'm now going to race through a high-level summary, then I'll come back at the end to a non-spoiler ending, and then a quick discussion of my take on things. So, the story starts out with an interesting hook. An old man dying in the hospital. He's talking to his pastor about the visions he's been seeing, like a prophecy of what is to come. And then the old man dies. But the old man himself was actually named Wesley Dodds. And that was the persona of the original 1930s and 1940s Sandman. This is the one before Neil Gaiman took over. Sandman wore a green suit, a fedora, a World War I gas mask, and he'd use a gun that emitted a sleep gas to incapacitate the criminals. And just making him the one who's seeing these things was a pretty cool Easter egg. And his passing segues us into the world where metahumans are kind of censured. A world where they don't play baseball in the World Series any longer. fact, superhero costumes are dressed up with and now used in themed restaurants and diners. But now, in this future time, there's a whole new crop of heroes out there. Consider them like the sons and offspring of the heroes that we would have known for some time. And there's a prevailing notion, the older heroes stood for good. They stood for justice. But the new batch doesn't have any of that. So what if the morality of the Golden Age didn't exist in contemporary metahumans? What if they fought the villain and didn't care about collateral damage or innocent bystanders in the background? They just wanted to fight. An overpowered crew who didn't have the morals of their elders. Now, with this backdrop, the metahuman, the Spectre, comes to visit the pastor. And he says that the two of them will be witnesses. That Armageddon is coming, and they must witness it. So the Spectre takes the Reverend astrally across the world to witness events. Well, so we can see the events through the eyes of the pastor, who's essentially a bystander. And we've seen this kind of storytelling before. We got to have that one character that among the other characters, they have to explain it to him. It lets the exposition of the story come across naturally, without needing a data dump of background and explanation. For example, you see this in the remake of Ocean's 11. Matt Damon's character, Linus Caldwell. You had to have that one character that as the steps of the heist are being explained to him, it's simultaneously being explained to the audience. Or more simply, 10 Cloverfield Lane. And I'm sorry, I might be in the minority here, but I just love these Cloverfield movies. Even the last one, which everyone seems to hate. Here you have Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character, Michelle. And I so much have a thing for Mary Elizabeth Winstead. In fact, here's a picture of her, just so we can all appreciate her for a few moments. Good old Mary. In any event, she gets into an accident and wakes up chained in a bunker. And the world building is all done through the exposition of the two other main characters, explaining to Michelle what is going on outside. So we, the audience, get to learn all about this through Michelle's perspective. Because she didn't quite know herself. Moving back to the story. So astrally, we get brought around, and we finally see the first stop is Superman. And he exiled himself for the last 10 years due to an encounter, which they'll get into. But now he's like a farmer. And Wonder Woman comes to visit him. Tries to entice him to return. Accuses him of not facing his fears. You see, there's a being, Magog, the character that Superman exiled himself from. And that he is out there. And he's out of control. And Superman says, I tried to warn you 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, there was a fight out in Kansas. Magog led his Justice Battalion against a villain called Parasite. And in the fight, Parasite broke open Captain Atom's containment suit. He split the atom. And there was an atomic explosion that destroyed the entire state of Kansas. Radiation and fallout killed 1 million people. It was a total loss to America's breadbasket and a sterilization of all agriculture. Also, on top of what had happened 10 years ago, we get some glimpses of what happened and has befallen the other major heroes. Aquaman just stays in Atlantis, a very Atlantis-first-centered sense of nationality. The Flash just runs around his city constantly, almost ushering in the city to like a utopia. It's free from crime, because he's always everywhere and can stop everything. Hawkman stays up in the Pacific Northwest, and some actually consider him an eco-terrorist, fighting against any who would disturb the birds' sanctuaries that were already on the land. Green Lantern builds an Emerald City at the edge of the planet, just awaiting any cosmic threats that may dare come to Earth. And Batman, he has control of Gotham, letting his robotic bat drones clean up anything that occurs. Now, the second installment opens up with some of these out-of-control metahumans in the midst of another altercation. It's actually near the Statue of Liberty. And we see a group calling themselves the Americommandos and the Minutemen. They fought foreign wars to protect the U.S. from abroad, but they overlooked the insidious menace that is really threatening America. Immigrants. The poor, tired, huddled masses camping on the shores, begging citizenship. Immigrants who dare to expect sanctuary. They claim America is not as big any longer. By the way, this is the Americommandos. America is not as big any longer. It can't house you. It can't feed you. But you still force your way onto our shores. To it, the heroes of the time, the contemporary ones, come to save the day. They use flames and lasers to defend the innocent immigrants. But the bystanders, they're caught in this retaliation. The heroes act like madmen, as if they're battling over territory instead of freedom, justice, and the American way. And this sets us all up to cue in the return of the heroes. Cue the fanfare, the awe, the relief of this happening. Now, when the altercation's all complete, they follow it up. When they're done, the heroes go over to the United Nations, to which they proclaim, "We're back. We're sorry we've been gone. We will fix everything." Now a counterpoint arises. There's a government boardroom who've been expecting and fearing that this day would come. A day when ordinary man no longer has the ability to be captains of their own destiny. Their futures, they feel, are no longer in their hands. And here is where the Spectre knows that there will be a coming judgment. A coming evil was born on this day. And only the Reverend's prophetic dreams may be the answer to what that is. And there's another coalition of forces. A coalition that fears the return of the original metahumans. A Mankind Liberation Front, led by Lex Luthor, joined by an heir to Ra's al Ghul's empire, Lord Naga, a.k.a. the Cobra, Selena Kyle, a.k.a. the Catwoman, Edward Nygma, a.k.a. the Riddler. And they have a slightly brainwashed Captain Marvel, or Shazam, if you prefer. So our heroes go about fight after fight, and we're talking about the new ones that came back. They go out trying to persuade every single metahuman they encounter to join in under the leadership of Superman, to join the League. But it does happen that some do not fall in, that they do not want to be led. And each act of rebellion that Superman faces, he gets increasingly frustrated. Remember, social government was never something that Superman had to deal with. It was totally new territory for him. And perhaps the pressures that are thrust upon an emerging leader could bend even the Man of Steel to a breaking point. And after all this effort, after all this policing, he is still yet to find Magog. And this leaves them with another problem. What to do with all the captives that will not join the League? So Diana, Wonder Woman, has an idea. Can we get Aquaman to house them near Atlantis? Under the ocean, will there not be any threat to any? Long story short, Atlantis is not unused to being burdened by the surface world's refuse. And they will not have any more. Request to house the criminals is denied. How fun. But now, we do have an item of interest. Magog has been found. Superman gets to face Magog, and the war of ideals begins. They argue and blame each other for what happened. Superman thinks Magog sent 6 unstable heroes up against a lone foe, the Parasite, which ended up killing 1 million people. Therefore, hey, it's your fault, Magog. And Magog's like, no, Superman, it's your fault. See, you were the Boy Scout that wouldn't change with the times. When the Joker came to Metropolis, he detonated a bomb that killed 92 men. And what Superman adds, and 1 woman. So now you know he doesn't have Lois Lane because Joker's bomb killed her. But even after that, it wouldn't let Kal-El do anything about it. Nor Bruce Wayne. You know, the Joker just does what he does and then just gets thrown into Arkham, where he will eventually, inevitably, escape and do it all over again. So, Magog killed the Joker for payback. And for doing this, Magog is sent off to jail. But the court of public opinion was with him, and Magog was acquitted of the murder of the Joker. He became the country's hero. In his defiance of the current world order, Magog wanted the mantle now of Earth's mightiest hero, and he wanted to take that from Superman. Show the world that he was the man of tomorrow. The future. One who would kill when necessary. But Superman couldn't take it. The change that he was seeing in the world that was occurring in real time was just too much for him. So he fled, and he became an exile. So Magog did what he did 10 years ago after that by leading the Justice Battalion in the fight against Parasite. And 1 million people died. But in this confrontation, now he just wants to be judged. Magog wants to die. He wants to take all the punishment and torture that this millions of ghosts have been haunting him with, and have it finally taken away from him. He wants to end that. And this leads Superman into a proclamation. We are at war. He travels to Apokolips, trying to find something to do with the captives, like he tried with Atlantis. But this time he finds Orion in control of Apokolips, having unseated Darkseid. Orion himself thought of uprooting the aberrant lowlies away and drop all his refuse on another planet. But then he thought better of it. He thought better of submitting another planet to his detritus. And those who were ground under the boot heel of Darkseid on Apokolips found this new freedom that was given to them. It was just the same sort of paralyzing of their psyche as fascism was. Orion was unable to create a paradise out of Apokolips with the people that were there. But he offers Kal-El, send me your prisoners. I will house them. But Superman can't off-world people who only know Earth as their home. He won't do it. But he does get an idea from, I think, the character Big Barda. It's like you need a facility to hold them and a security force to keep the facility intact. Essentially, build a gulag for the metahumans. A maneuver that would eventually get Bruce Wayne to move forward and join that Mankind Liberation Front. Now, the third act of this is just an arms race. We get the Mankind Liberation Front to get together and start building thousands of these Batman drones to be used for themselves in protection against the metahumans. And some of the younger heroes, like the sidekicks, they start to come together with them. People I really can't name. I think there's like Speedy, who was like the young Green Arrow, Kid Flash, a girl Green Lantern, things like that. And while this whole thing goes on, the Gulag was created. They have sentries in it. Time moves on too, and eventually it starts to boil inside, and it erupts in turmoil. And the nuisance of that catastrophe is what the heroes now have to come together to suppress. And that's the match. That's the one that builds the whole story to such a head. There's carnage and chaos all around. Because, now, again, with me in the bad pantheon of DC, there's something which I would never really have known, but apparently the Shazam is more powerful than Superman. I can't gauge how that's a thing, but I think it is a thing in this universe. So we have all the heroes going towards the Gulag, and obviously all the villains are in the Gulag. And now that they're all in one place, the government decides we will not have this chance again. And they launch a nuke to that site. Let's just try to destroy as many of them as possible, preferably all of them. And they actually get a pilot of one of the Blackhawks, from one of the Blackhawks to fly it out there. Again, another Easter egg. They probably are tons in this book. I don't know many of them, but here's another one. You know, the Blackhawks were like, they had their own series for a while. They're pretty much pilots. They're pilots. And through this whole chaos and eruption and catastrophe and you name it, we finally come to the judgment that the Spectre is there for. Because this will determine the fate of the world. Okay? If the nuke drops, then the superhumans will die, and humanity will be spared their violence in the future. If the nuke is forbidden to drop, the metahumans' battle will continue, and in time will swallow the earth. In either case, they're going to face the evil of a genocide, and the Spectre will punish those responsible for the evil. And the Spectre leaves it up for the Reverend to decide, to judge. Should the nuke succeed, or should it fail? And whom shall the Spectre judge? And here, my dear listeners, is where I leave off the synopsis. They sure packed a bunch into the 4 issues that made up this story. But what is there to say about it? Well, I'm going to start with the obvious. I'm going to go high on this one first. We get to see this story told through the art of Alex Ross. And if you look through the past of what Alex Ross has accomplished, you should be as stunned as I am. He typically works in the medium of watercolors. And he makes people, whether they be comic book characters or just ordinary citizens, he makes them really burst from the canvas in such an amazing, amazing way. And the best thing that there is, when he does do a comic book character, they're the most human-toned images you've ever seen. I mean, Thor and Captain America simply looked like people, like regular, ordinary people. Albeit strong, but you could find these guys in a gym if you needed to. And just look at this comparison, alright? Here's a couple things I wanted to put on the screen. Here is the original Avengers #1 cover. And here's the version that Alex Ross did. I mean, just wow. And here's another rendition for Spider-Man #1. Now, I'm not knocking in any way, shape, or form what Todd McFarlane has done when he started this Spider-Man book. But here's Spider-Man #1 by Todd McFarlane, and here's what Alex Ross did. I mean, this stuff is just utterly amazing work. And if you've ever seen his work on The Marvels, I mean, this is a 4-issue story that showed that when heroes and villains fought in New York, what it looked like in New York from the average New Yorker's point of view. Here's a couple examples. Here's Giant Man just taking a step, but you get a perspective from the people underneath it, or him, taking the step. And this one of Angel, he's just trying to take what looks like a scared mutant girl away from the mob. And just look at how he drew the angel and colored it. You'd think that that was an actual person with wings. And just look at the mob. That is an angry mob. So this art should speak for itself. So, point 1, Alex Ross. Oh yeah. Secondly, I'm a fan of the work of the Elseworlds imprint. They started out strong with Gotham try it one more time, with Gotham by Gaslight, putting Batman in Victoria, England, and he's up against Jack the Ripper. And Elseworlds made other stories, like if Britain continued to be a religious state with Holy Terror, or even something like Robin 3000. So I like that what-if nature of it. Although, unlike what Marvel did with the what-if stories, they didn't just take a story in the canon and said, hey, what if it went to an alternate future? They made their own universe by saying, what if the whole event started different and moved forward? Which I will say, although I've been out of the comic industry for the majority of my life, I did hear that there was the angle that a whole bunch of these stories had taken. They appear to... how can I say this, really? So, the multiverse saga... no, that's not a good idea. Just the ability to make it a multiverse. Just to let all these different companies just go multiverse. They can just reset the whole Marvel Universe, I think, at one point. So the thing is that anything that happened before now didn't happen, or it happened in a different realm, and we're starting brand new. Just, we don't have to be continuity to the past any longer. I mean, some of the major stories all seem to occur in another universe. So while you can get great stories where characters might die or their origins are updated for recent events, that's the route they went. Reset the whole universe, so instead of the Punisher being from Vietnam, which was in the 70s, now he's an Iraqi war vet, or even Afghanistan, and boom, we've brought him into like the 2000s or something like that, instead of being from so old ago. And sometimes they're just in a different universe, so you can have just an event. In this world, Professor X is the evil one, and Magneto had always fought for coexistence with the humans. Or in this one, the Flash protects Gotham, and Batman was a Metropolis person, because Superman's in Russia. Everything got multiverse, and you never needed to know what the history was, because you can just make it standalone and throw it somewhere else and say, I don't know anything that happened before, I'm just going to do it this story the way I want to do it and call it a day. In fact, just before I put things down, there was 2 events that had occurred that helped me jettison my fandom and collecting. The first one was, there was an event that did a major rewrite of all the major titles. They called it Heroes Reborn. All the main Avengers, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, boom, reset number 1. And they retold the old stories in a new environment. I think there might have been like an in-universe explanation for this. Something about Franklin Richards, and I think they really wanted Rob Liefeld to come back and draw for Marvel after he's been in Image for a while. But all of these major Avenger characters went back to an issue number 1. And this is where I gotta say, the 90s were sometimes a horrible time to be collecting comics. There were always multiple covers, higher prices, number 1s kept coming out trying to get new readers in there and restart sales. It was expensive. So that helped me jettison things. And as I slowly narrowed down to like my X-Men, they had the perfect time for me to cut the cord. They did what they called the Age of Apocalypse storyline. And up to this point, it was hard to put the books down, because there's always a cliffhanger lying around, and I just had to read to find out what this means in the next issue. But when they did this and cut everything, I was able to walk away clean. All the X books ended, and they reset to different dimensional timelines. And I was able to say adios, and I didn't follow it. And an interesting postscript to this story, about 10 years ago or so, I saw the omnibus editions of The Age of Apocalypse in my library. I was able to read the whole thing 30 years after the fact. I was in my 40s now. And I will say, I wasn't impressed by the storyline. I know people go gaga over it. I just wasn't impressed. So, now, why bother even going through all this nostalgia here? Well, when I went through this story, it had a couple things going against it from my reader eyes. First, it had a lot of hype. And I'm just not one for hype. It could be a little bit of a turnoff. Especially because now you've been promised something that's so amazingly fantastic. I mean, what can possibly match up to that anticipation? In fact, I didn't even realize that this was considered an Elseworlds imprint. I had no idea what I was getting into. It was one of those, I heard it was a good story, and let me finally check it out. And I read through the foreword. And I got to see a little of the reason why they wrote the story. You know, what the original inspiration was that the idea had come from. It just seemed to me, at first, to be another multiverse story. And cue in my pseudo-disappointment from my nostalgia segue earlier. But I do have the ability to suspend my pre-beliefs. My prejudices, if you will. Which I did. Now, I will say, I probably got a lot more out of this story by going through it a second time when I tried to write up my notes for this that I have behind my camera here than I did the first time I went through it. And again, with my ignorance of most of the pantheon of DC, I may be able to say that there's a ton of characters that were created for the story that never existed before. Like the sons of or the successors of the prior heroes that were put into the story. Which can be a little something when you read it. While almost all of these new ones are practically unnamed, there is sort of a, well, who are these people and what are their abilities? But I just went with it. Well, look, even look at the cover. I'll try to put this in here so we can see it. Okay, here's the front. All right, and there, you know, in the front, I could see Superman. And I think the Flash is over here. And you got Wonder Woman. And that might be Green Lantern off to the corner. But, like, who's this metal guy? I personally don't know. Now, with the cover, this cover flips. And I see Shazam. I see Batman. I think one back here somewhere is Dr. Fate. We don't know much about, but I know the helmet. But these others, like this crystalline kind of thing, I don't know. There might be a Green Arrow there, maybe, but I don't know the rest. Same happens on the back cover. You know, I see Hawkman. I'm pretty sure this is Power Girl. The cleavage is pretty much all I know about her, though. But the others, like this giant dude with the gimp mask, no clue. And who's this little silver-clad guy over there? And on the flip side, I don't think I know any of them. I mean, this Alice Cooper guy might be the Creeper, but I also don't know any of the Creeper. This might be Zatanna, maybe. That looks like Galactus, but I figured it can't be, so, you know. Again, don't know the Pantheon, unfortunately. Now, that being confessed beforehand, I will have to say, the story is just fine. And I'm not saying it's only fine. I'm saying it's just fine. I liked the throughput of the purpose of the story. You know, the judgment that was to come. It was grounded in a slightly plausible storyline. Having the events boil and come to a head and see what will occur in the outcome or possibly even an aftermath. In fact, it almost reminded me of two other stories I remember having read. Years and years back again. One was called Mephisto Verse. It was a storyline in Marvel. It was a 4-issue miniseries where Mephisto was doing what he could and he kept trying to get a different soul. And it's wrapped up in Mephisto versus the Fantastic Four, X-Factor versus X-Men versus the Avengers. And the whole point of going through this whole thing was trying to get Thor's soul from the Avengers and use it against Hela. But you don't know that until the climax. So in the Fantastic Four issue, he gets the Invisible Girl. And he trades up an X-Factor for Jean Grey. And then the X-Men one, he trades that for Rogue, because he needs Rogue's power to get Thor in the Avengers one. So as it progressed, well, I'll say naturally, it got to its ending. And I can have respect for that. A very similar storyline, if you ever played the video game Marvel Ultimate Alliance, I played this one 2 or 3 times actually back in the day. And here you have progressive challenges that you face as whichever character you choose to play through the game. You know, starts out with a shield helicarrier, and you just jaunt about the Earth of the Marvel Universe, and you get into adventures, usually involving heroes being kidnapped, like Nightcrawler and Jean Grey, and you have to go and rescue them. But eventually it gets to a point where Doom uses Nightcrawler's abilities to enter into Mephisto's realm. I mean, which eventually gets you through Atlantis, it gets you through Asgard, and where Doom in Asgard is able to absorb Odin's power. And that was the ultimate goal, for Doom to become like a god. And then you get the finale for that one. So you got the major storyline you need to build and have the building blocks to get you from point A to B, B to C, C to D. So I did like how Kingdom Come was able to do this. And that's how I know I followed this story along the way. It was following the path it needed to. Current day problems, old day solution, trouble with the solution, anarchy, climax, or possibly end all, be all. So overall, good story, great artwork. Either it was too much overhyped by the time I got to it, or maybe I had become more of a mature reader in my middle age, that I essentially aged myself out of the target audience. Or, like I said, too much of the multiverse and the dystopian future has happened since then, that it's old hand by now. Almost as if, you know, go back in the days to Die Hard. Die Hard was awesome, especially if you were alive when it came out. But there have been so many Die Hard clones since then that if you went back to that one for the first time now, it will not pack a same punch as it deserves like when it did then. So that could be a thing where this environment, the world this story took place in, has been so overdone since then. I might have caught a few of those, that going back to an original is difficult. As for me, I actually borrowed this from the library, and they've been asking for it back. So now that I'm completed with this one, I can finally fulfill my requirements to them and get it back to them for someone else who might want to read this for themselves. Luckily, my library did away with all like the late fees and such, or even really returning things at all. But you don't get to take anything else out until you bring things back. So I like my library too much to keep things from them. But there you have it. That was this episode of a Joe's Book Review. You let me know if I did well or did bad. Am I off my rocker? Am I too old? I don't know. But I'm just going to keep going through this. Like I said, I can now hopefully get down to the other 4 I've got lying around next to me. And I can catch up work, start doing my vocal work again, and get back on the horse. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully I didn't waste it too long. Again, subscriptions will be great for me. I'm hoping to hit 500 as soon as I can. But thank you very much, and I'll see you here shortly.